All right, welcome everyone to this online lecture. This is the final lecture of the year here. We're going to be talking about 4.2, energy flow through ecosystems. So remember back in section 1, we talked about consumers and producers and the effects on both of those and how we move energy or how they create energy for their ecosystems. Okay, so key questions for today. How does energy flow through ecosystems, and how do ecological pyramids help analyze energy flow through trophic levels? Vocabulary for today: food chain, food web, trophic level, and ecological pyramid. There are some other vocabulary words that are within this section, but I decided to take those out and not talk about those concepts there. But you can check those out in your book if you want to. Okay, so food chains and food webs. This is a concept that you probably have talked about before and are very familiar with back in sixth grade or even out in grade school. So I'm going to just briefly cover these real quickly. In every ecosystem, primary producers and consumers are linked through feeding relationships. So remember, producers are those organisms that take energy and convert them into usable food for themselves and for other organisms. So this is like plants, which go through bacteria, could be kelp in an ocean. They go through photosynthesis also, or else organisms that go through chemosynthesis, which would be those bacteria. They use chemicals that have sulfur within them to convert those inorganic compounds into organic compounds that are usable within that ecosystem. And that is done without light, if you remember that from section 1. So what we're going to be looking at here is energy. So how does energy flow through the ecosystem? Well, energy flows one way only, so it's kind of like a one-way stream. It goes downstream, not upstream, from primary producers through various consumers. So remember in section 1 also we talked about all those different consumers that we could have: carnivores, omnivores, detrivores, decomposers, and I'm missing a few there, but you get the gist there, all those different types of consumers. And what we're looking through at with food chains and food webs is how energy flows from producers to consumers. Okay, so this is something that you've probably seen before. This is a food chain. A food chain is a chain of a series of organisms that which energy is transferred from one organism to another organism to the next. And it's a continuous cycle here. And this is the simplest way to think of energy moving through an ecosystem. So like we've said, everything starts with producers. So this grass here, it is going through photosynthesis, taking sun and water, and also carbon dioxide from the environment and changing that into sugar molecules for its energy storage, but also for other organisms. So as you can see here, we convert energy that we cannot use as these organisms, but we rely on these producers to produce food for the grasshopper, which is a primary consumer, and we'll talk about consumers next. But we see the grasshopper, then the frog eats the grasshopper, so therefore there's another energy change, and then the snake eats the frog, the hawk eats the snake, which is the final consumer. So that's how this energy moves through this ecosystem here. And then let's say we have waste from the hawk. That's where decomposers come into play, where they decompose that waste, and then they decompose it, and detrivores then break it down for producers to provide nutrients to producers in order for them to produce more energy from inorganic compounds that we normally can't get energy from. So you kind of see how this cycle just keeps going and going and going. Life is made up of cycles. That's what the next section would be about if we were to get that far, but we're not going to get to that And you've talked about all those cycles in your past classes. So we've talked about the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, all of those cycles we've already talked about in previous classes. So this is another cycle. We start here with producers, consumers, and it goes back to producers at some time. All right, so that is a very easy way of looking at how energy changes or how energy is used throughout an ecosystem. Food webs are a little bit different. So in most ecosystem, energy and matter move throughout feeding relationships that are much more complicated than a simple chain. So things, organisms just don't eat grass, or frogs just don't eat grasshoppers. They can go in different directions. Some eat, plants and animals. Okay, so it just isn't this simple chain of events that go along and we're stuck to energy in that fashion. It's a lot more complicated than what you might think. So that's where food webs come into play. So in an ecosystem, there's a network of feeding interactions. So there's a lot of interactions between organisms feeding on each other, passing on energy from one organism to the other, through which both energy and matter move. These interactions is called a food web. All right, and this next page here will show you a good diagram of a food web. So we can see here, okay, we have all of these different consumers. Our primary producers are down here. Okay, these are our primary producers. We have algae and plants and leaves, seeds, fruits, whatever it might be. And these are all being consumed by these first level consumers here. All right, so we can see here that there are a bunch of food chains within food webs. Here's one highlighted here for you. So it starts with algae, and then it goes to shrimp grass, then goes to this fish, then to this herring of some sort, then to the vulture, and then probably go back down to our detrivores, and then our plants get nutrients from them in order to grow. So that's how that cycle takes place. That's one food chain within this whole food web. But you can see we can take different paths here. This shrimp could go to this bass, and the bass get ate by this herring, and then the herring obviously could go to the alligator, and then to the vulture that is a scavenger. But you can see all of these different pathways through here. So there's a lot of food chains within food webs. And we notice that the detrivores here have a role within this also, which is decomposing and breaking down these parts into little pieces for plants and algae to use. So this is what ecologists study. So ecologists study the ecosystems, and they might see, they might map out this food web and say, okay, what if an event happens? Let's say oil gets poured into this pond or lake. Okay, what would be affected? Okay, so we might have an effect of, let's say, algae. Maybe that oil kills off the algae blooms that occur in this lake. Okay, so what would be affected? We might have grass shrimp may not have something to feed on since it doesn't grow on plants. So maybe this has a decline of population, which makes a decline of the crayfish, and so on and so forth. And you can see how that works. When one thing goes out of this food web, a lot of different things change. So that's what ecologists study, and they study the changes of interactions between all of these organisms. Another thing could happen is, what if we don't have to have a substance that is introduced, but maybe another organism gets introduced to this system. So a great example of this in Kansas is the zebra mussel. So the zebra mussel is an exotic species to Kansas, meaning that it wasn't in existence here. It's not native within this area, but it did travel over from from the Black Sea is where they are native to, and they attached to boats, and boats came over to the United States, and now they are all over the United States and has even made it to the West Coast there. But zebra mussels are in our lakes in Kansas, and they have what they can do is take over different mussel groups. So if there might be native mussels within our lakes that are original to that lake, and they totally wipe out that area. And maybe let's say raccoons eat mussels, and they cannot open this zebra mussel or something. So raccoons are out of food because they're used to eating those native mussels that the zebra mussel has now killed off. And just another thing zebra mussels can do, they can filter a lot of plankton throughout their. That's how they feed is through plankton. So they can filter a lot of this out. And if they if they take over this lake, they could deplete the amount of plankton in that lake, therefore affecting fish that feed on this plankton and everything like that. So exotic species can be detrimental to a food web like this. One other thing I want to talk about is ecological pyramids. Ecological pyramids is each step of a food chain or food web is called a trophic level. So each step is a trophic level. So we have our primary producers. Obviously, those produce that energy that we need. We have first level consumers, second level consumers, third level consumers. So we can see here, this is our first level producer, first level consumer, third level consumer, and then even a fourth level consumer if you want to go that far. Okay, so we can look at that that way. That's our trophic levels. One way to illustrate trophic levels in an ecosystem is with a model called ecological pyramid. So this is an ecological pyramid also. What ecological pyramids do, it models and shows the relationship of amount of energy or matter contained within each trophic level in a food chain or food web. So it tells you, it symbolizes, it models how much energy each trophic level has for the next trophic level. So primary producers, obviously they produce the food that we need. So 100% of what the energy that they have goes to the next level. And you notice that only about 10% of, you can see here, it goes down by 10%. Each level that is consumed goes down 10%. So let's say this is grass, a cow eats grass, 10% of that energy goes to containing energy within that cow, and humans eat that cow. About only 1% of the original energy that was there is going into storing energy of us. So you can see how this, the energy level there as we go up the trophic levels decreases as we move up that ecological pyramid. Okay, so talk a little bit more about energy here. So pyramids of energy show the relationship amount of energy available to each trophic level of food chain or food web. It's kind of what we just talked about there. You can see how energy decreases as we go up the consumer list here. Why do we see this energy drop? So I talked about how it decreased by 10%. This is because organisms have to use energy. They have to use energy in order to live. Okay, we use that energy for respiration, to breathe, to go through ATP synthesis. We must move, so we use energy that way that we consume. We have to move, we have to grow, we have to reproduce. So we're using all that energy that we used to have in order to do all of this stuff, and very little energy is actually going into storage there in order for the next consumer to get any energy out of it. So you're seeing energy is decreasing as we move up this pyramid. Okay, so that's all I wanted to talk about in this section. We are done with notes. We are done with the end of the year here. So congratulations getting through everything. You have one more mastery quiz, and a test left. Good luck.